The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome and hello, and nice to see you here at episode 148 of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. We're going to jump right into it because this is part 2 of our interview with Barrel of Monk's co-founders, Bill McFee and Kevin Abbott. If you have not listened to part 1, go ahead and pause right now. Go back to episode 147. Trust me, you're going to need it to hear about some of the things that we're going to keep talking about in this episode. So if you have listened to episode 147 already, then let's just jump right into it. Bill McFee, Kevin Abbott, Barrel of Monks, Boca Raton, Florida, Florida Beer Podcast. Here we go. Now, one of the things that I've heard is that when it comes to distribution, a large part of distribution is just getting the word of your brewery out so that they actually come here and do that. And of the beers that you've brewed, it seemed, I guess, was it an early decision or was it a happy accident that the beer that seems to have taken off like wildfire when it comes to distribution to bring people in and get the word of the brewery around is your wit beer?
I'll let Kevin address that.
Well, the wit beer was the first beer we brewed here. So batch 1 at Barrel of Monks was the wit beer because we knew that it was going to be that's the olive branch to the beer community, right? The Blue Moon and Shock Top at that time, wheat beers have fallen off in the market just in general since we've launched. They're less popular than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But at one point, Blue Moon and Shock Top were two of the best selling craft beers, if you want to call them that, in the country. So we knew that we had a beer that a lot of people conceptually would understand and would be much more accessible than a double, a triple, a quadruple, a saison, things of that nature. So we knew it from day one. It was going to be our number one seller. We brewed it as batch 1. The first time we actually looked into putting beer in small format bottles because we started doing everything in 750s and bottle conditioning. Wit doesn't make sense in that package. But the first time we actually put that beer out and said, hey, one day we're going to have this in a grocery market store, there was no choice but to do the Wizard. So that has been our number one selling beer from day one. It continues to be. It now has some competition with our single in Havana, our Belgian single, or Blonde Ale with Guava. And then we've recently launched an IPA, and we've seen some leaps and bounds with those beers as far as challenging Wizard in certain ways. But it's a Belgian brewery. Allagash White, man. I mean, you look at the beers that have translated to the U.S. market in a significant way, whether from Belgium or very good. And let me make sure I understand. Allagash White is great. That is an amazing really Belgian white beer.
I hate to say it, but it is.
No, you shouldn't. It's a great beer. I mean, it's amazing. So those beers have translated. So we kind of followed in the footsteps of the people that did it before.
It's always great to see your former brewer, Joel Codner, good friend of the show, how happy he was when Allagash finally came to town.
Oh, yeah.
And I see it around a little bit. You mentioned the bottles, and I would love to talk about that because I guess let's go to the traditional method of bottling. And the first time that I came here, cannot remember the gentleman's name for the life of me, but he was a taproom manager, British.
Zach Agrin.
Both remember. Zach was one of the most amazing human beings in my life that I've ever met. And he was saying how basically a beer, and we'll take White Wizard Wit, comes in 3 different carbonations. You've got one carbonation for the tap room. You've got one carbonation for keg distro. And then you've got, White Wizard Wit probably isn't the best example for this, but you've got a different one for the bottle conditioning. So let's talk about the bottle conditioning to begin with. Why is that such a big aspect of the Belgian style?
I think it's one of the things that helps make packaged, bottled Belgian beer unique. Very few American breweries even want to mess with it. It's tedious, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time, and once in a while it fails, which can be expensive. But why is it so popular over there? It adds a unique texture and mouthfeel. One of the things that in your profile of deciding what makes a beer unique is, in addition to the aroma, the color, the head, it's the actual texture of the beer, the feel of the beer, and that relates really to the carbonation. And so you can make beer by either force carbonating it, which put it under pressure in CO2 for a period of time, and the carbon dioxide will go into solution in the beer, and it carbonates. And that's the way 99% of beer is made. But if you do natural carbonation, which basically is a second fermentation that you do in the bottle by adding a little additional yeast and sugar to the package, there's something about that process that gives a different texture to the bubble and a different feel to the beer in your mouth. And I think it makes it much more appealing. So that's what I can tell you about bottle conditioning.
And I'll throw in a couple things there. One, if you wanted carbonation a couple hundred years ago, that was your only option. Okay, so that's where you got carbonation from, because you didn't have carbonation stones and CO2 tanks that could force carbonation into a beer. Number two, I come from the wine world originally. I was a wine steward for many years before I got into beer, and there's a reason why champagnes with the method champenois, which is a bottle re-fermentation, were so much more sought after than cheap American force carbonated champagne-like wines. And that is, one way you can describe this is that the bubbles in like a bottle of water that you get at a store, I always say they're clumsy. They're kind of big, they're kind of clumsy, they're unpleasant. The bubbles during a bottle re-fermentation in a bottle are tight. They have almost a creamy texture. They wash over your tongue in a certain way, and they're just much more pleasant. And also you can get the carbonation level up higher, and carbonation is delivering flavors to your olfactory senses as those bubbles are popping. So you literally have more aroma with more carbonation. And you can get higher carbonation bottle conditioning that you cannot do on a machine that's force carbonated, because you'll just get foam. So most beers are carbonated about 2.4 to 2.5 volumes of CO2. Our beers in the bottle are up to 4 volumes of CO2. So you literally have more flavor because of the bottle conditioning.
Okay, so let's continue on with the people that may not know necessarily a distribution carbonation, making something for that. What exactly is that going to look like, and why are you doing those sorts of things?
No. For Wizard and for Single Havana, for our IPA, for our draft beer, it has to be at that 2.5 level of carbonation, or else it will not pour on draft. Draft systems are not set up in the greater market to pour higher carbonation beer. So if I gave a keg to the coffee district in Delray at 4 volumes of CO2, it would just pour foam. You have to have a lot of line restrictions. You have to have a lot of equipment. You got to be cold enough to pour that kind of beer. And with packaging, you can't even put the beer in the bottle force carbonated at 4 volumes. So you have to kind of walk that line of what the rest of the industry is doing. And I honestly think if you drink our triple on draft, it is a really good beer. I'm biased, sure.
Now, is that on draft here?
Yeah. Well, anywhere.
Okay.
If you drink our beer on draft, it is going to be around 2.5 to 2.6 volumes of CO2. If you drink that beer in a bottle, it is a completely different experience. And I honestly would, if you weren't thinking about it, if you weren't told, I think you might think they're different beers, because bottle conditioning really does that much of a difference to the beer. Gotcha.
I do want to kind of talk about the draft lines here, as Zach had mentioned earlier, is that it's a very different system. Like, you basically got the system imported from Belgium, correct?
These are imported draft faucets, and we have line restriction. We set up the whole draft system to be able to handle these higher carbonation beers. Absolutely.
So we try to have our beers carbonated at a higher level in our tap room, but because we're doing so much production at this point, it's not like back in the day where I would literally say these 4 kegs are only higher volume CO2. Now we literally put more head pressure on the kegs so that they kind of slowly carbonate a little bit in the keg during the day. Head pressure will carbonate a beer. You don't have to just force CO2 into it through a carb stone. So our beers here will always be a little bit more highly carbonated, but not to the point that they were even in the first days, because we no longer have the luxury of doing that. We have to turn over beer so quickly.
It's amazing. Kind of the problems that you want to have.
Yeah, I think so.
With the bottle conditioning, obviously you would need a very special bottle. You can't just pick up a standard bottle, even a wine bottle, because the bottle will basically explode. If obviously these look sort of like wine bottles, but they are very distinctly different. So how difficult was it to find a distributor just for those bottles, and especially the big ones, the 750s, the ones that are wine bottle size?
To my knowledge, there's still no American glass maker that's producing bottles.
So you have to get the bottles imported.
So they're imported. We get ours through Canada, but they're actually German glass. Yeah.
And let me add that when I got into this industry 15 years ago, the 750 and that bottle size was very popular. There was tons of breweries doing
the
them.
quote unquote bomber.
Yeah, the bombers,
absolutely.
right? And the 22 ounce bottles as well, right? 22 ounce and 750 milliliter bottles were huge. They were big at bottle shares. Every brewery was doing them. In the last 15 years, I would guess that if we had a bar graph, every year we've had less and less of those available. So the market is kind of contracted, which means that there's not a lot of people that want to get into it. And, we just have people that are like, we don't want that bottle size. We want 12 ounce long necks. We want cans. Cans obviously has taken over the market.
Yeah, and I was going to say, because even with some Belgian breweries, like yesterday when I was trying to find a beer for our Friday thing, St. Bernardus has beers in cans. They had Watto in cans. I know I've got some Tokyo in cans. Bill had to be cushioned. That blow had to be cushioned. I guess, what is it about Belgian beers to where glass is important, glass is necessary, and if it's not in glass, Bill needs to be soothed?
So, that's a good question. I still think that beer primarily, shouldn't say belongs in glass, but I do think it belongs in glass.
He's a traditionalist.
Frankly. I think I'm a big fan of beer in glass. Listen, the public wants the convenience of cans, the lack of breakability, the weight, the fact that you can kind of sneak them under the beach and then drink them there. So we've adapted to that, and so have the Belgian breweries. So that's why you're seeing actual Belgian beers coming across in cans now. It's for the American market. It's primarily over there. It's still primarily glass.
Well, the important thing is with bottle conditioning, you have to be in glass because the can will explode.
Gotcha.
It's not strong enough. So if you're doing bottle conditioning and you want to have that carbonation level up at 4 volumes of CO2, you can't put it in a can. As far as I know.
There are some that actually do what is known as partial bottle conditioning, where they will force some carbonation into the beer and then add a little bit of sugar and yeast where they can say it's sort of can conditioned.
But it doesn't get up that high as far as that.
It does not get as high a carbonation level as we can get into glass. That's the problem, because the can won't handle it.
So that's the main thing. When it comes to our Wizard, which as we've talked about, is not bottle conditioned, I will be the non-traditionalist and say that I don't think there's a difference between a can version of Wizard and a bottle version of Wizard. I don't think so. I could be wrong. I've had people tell me to my face that I was an idiot because I had a beer in a can as opposed to a bottle. And listen, there's perception. I'd love to see a really well-blinded study on that to see how that actually fleshes out. But I think that there are beers that will always, because of bottle conditioning, will need to be in glass because, as I said, our triple in a can and our triple in a 330 ml sturdy bottle that can get bottle conditioning, it is better in the bottle. Hands down, end of the day, that's the truth. But the regular can's about as good as what you're going to get on draft.
Gotcha. And obviously, not only are the cans, or not only is packaging changing, but you've also had to sort of change a little bit when it comes to broadening your styles and appealing to a wider market. You sort of mentioned the wit with mango.
The single with guava.
Guava, there we go. What kind of how difficult was that conversation? Because I remember Barrel of Monks was a staunch, traditional Belgian right down the line, and then all of a sudden, now we start tiptoeing towards. I hate to say tiptoeing towards mainstream, but that's the best way to say it.
It's fair.
I had to hug Bill a lot.
I was going to say, did you need to be?
I had to hold his head and run my hands through his hair and say it's going to be okay.
I cried on Kevin's shoulder a lot, but listen, you gotta. It's still, as much as it's a passion project, it's still a business, and we still have to recognize that we're not making the beer for us. We're making the beer for the consumer. So you gotta go with the flow.
And we can make great beer in different styles. So we are still a Belgian-inspired brewery, right? The vast majority of the beer we make, we use with Belgian ale yeast. And by the way, it's single in Havana. We market it as a blonde ale. It is a Belgian blonde ale. It is a single.
Gotcha.
It is a single with guava. We are in South Florida. We have influence of tropical fruit. It was a no-brainer to go with that beer, and it still has Belgian influence to it. It's just a little bit of a tweak on that. So I don't think that was a big departure in the fact that we were still using Belgian yeast. The real big departure is when we did our first couple lagers. We did an English porter. We were doing an IPA.
Yeah, because I was going to say Belgians don't lager. These are ales, right?
Well, there are Belgian lagers.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stella is the big one.
Yeah.
It is technically Belgian.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's actually brewed over here or not. Do you know?
I don't know.
But you mentioned the differences, and obviously you just consumed, and you're wearing the shirt of your IPA, which 8 years ago, did you ever think of opening the doors and having an IPA on draft?
There's a funny story because at one point we had talked about even doing a marketing campaign. We don't do IPAs. We decided we better not do that because we might have to eat our words. we would have had to. We did have one T-shirt that made some reference to where we go, we don't do IPAs or something like that. But anyway, we've again.
Well, there's two things there. One is that you have to let the market in some ways dictate, within reason, what you're going to do. So Single in Havana was a one-off seasonal fruit beer that was so popular that our distributors like, can you please do this year-round? And the market told us they wanted it. And we'd never planned on making that a thing, but it worked out. With the IPA, we had made some Belgian pale ales, some Belgian IPAs before, and I was of the opinion back in the day that Belgian IPAs tasted like soap because American C hops, citrus hops with Belgian yeast equals soap. And you look at like Kelly Belgique and Belgica and a lot of these IPAs, Flying Dog had one called Raging Bitch. They were all great for one sip. And then after two sips, you're like, oh man, this is a cloying, repetitive flavor. And then when we started getting these New World hops with all these berry and fruit-forward flavors, it started being more realistic to use Belgian yeast and hops, New World hops. And we made some good ones. But it really was, Ralph Renaud, who's our current head brewer, you work with what you got. And he's passionate about IPAs. And he said, I can make a really, really good IPA here. And we just gave him the leash to try some new things. And, Bill worked with him on recipes. And we ended up making what I thought was one of the best IPAs I had tried in a while.
Interesting.
And we said, well, do we really want to stand on ceremony and say, we just don't make IPAs, we just don't make beers without Belgian yeast? Or do we want to have a beer that we really like and we think makes sense for us? And that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was a holdout to some degree, but I got convinced that we really could make a really quality IPA that I enjoy drinking. I'm not total Belgian beer nerd. I have a broader horizon now, and I really enjoy our IPA.
Gotcha. But that doesn't mean that you're going to stop making things like Parade of Souls, which is my favorite Belgian, my favorite barrel of Monk's beer of all time.
And I'm happy to hear you say that because I love that beer as well. And we still do, we're always going to be doing not only the classic beers we've done in the past, but we're also going to be doing takeoffs on classic Belgian beer styles. I mean, I think this year we have a Grand Cru coming out, which is a Belgian Scotch ale, which is similar to a beer in some way, in spirit, to a Belgian Scotch ale we did. One of the first beers we ever did called Tartan Monk. And we're doing a bigger version of that. So we will always be pushing the limits, doing Belgian versions of classic styles. When we do the Grand Cru, it's always a classic beer style in general, but it leans heavily on Belgian influences. And we're still exploring the Belgian world, but now that we have a little bit of the handcuffs off, we can give ourselves an opportunity to make a beer that we're really proud of. And if we've got the skill set of someone like Bill, who's got the biggest brain of anyone I know, who can make incredible beer, we've got Ralph, who is a rock star as far as a talent of brewing, I want to be able to explore all those styles.
And it seems like there's still some other styles, I guess. Have you ever done like an Ode Brune, for example, or Flanders Red? Are you ready to start jumping into that, or you still got a little ways to go?
We have messed around with some styles that were close to that. So lightly sour beers. When you get into sours, see, one of our sister breweries, if you will, is Odd Breed Wild Ales, and Matt Manthe, who is the brewer for that place, makes, I think, world-class sour beers. And so we almost didn't want to sort of compete, if you will, or
No, I gotcha.
try to get into that.
And I will say the last Best of the Belgians beer fest that they had, he was there pouring his Ode Bruin, which was just otherworldly.
Oh, and
so good.
I mean, just to go off the topic, but I mean, anyone, even the classic people from Belgium, people from Old World that have been drinking these classic beers forever, they drink Matt Manthy's beers and go, this is exactly how they're supposed to be. I mean, there's a reason why he's won 3 gold medals at GABF, World Beer Cup, whatever it is, for his styles, because he knows how to make them well. But this is the thing, focusing on a style and really learning it is important. And early on with Barrel of Monks, that's one of the things I always hung my hat on, is that we tried to do one thing really, really well. I didn't want to be the Cheesecake Factory, right? Where you do a little bit of Asian inspired, you do a little bit of Italian, and you might say, well, you're a hypocrite because you're doing some other styles. But I think we really got what we were doing well. And we didn't make an IPA until we thought we could make one of the best IPAs that you're going to taste in South Florida, let alone, the craft beer industry. I don't think we made a lager until we were like, we can make a really, really good Pilsner. And you practice a little bit, you put it out there, and you make sure you have the expertise to function it.
That's amazing. So obviously the business has grown far beyond what I assume that you had originally thought of, especially you've got the really nice patio that's out front. I remember when that was just a couple tables in dirt, and you've partnered with a food truck, and Jeffrey Eats is here year round at this point.
Every day.
Correct?
Well, they're permanent. They're basically open every hour that we are.
Gotcha. How was that partnership formed? Because I remember you used to have just the rotating food trucks, just like every other brewery.
We did originally. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I mean, so Jeff started, he almost started his business, I think, and I might butcher this, around the same time that we started ours. So, I believe some of his first gigs were here. I could be off on that by, a couple months here or there. But he was doing the same rounds, going to tons of different breweries and doing that. And he was one of our more popular trucks. So when we booked him, the people enjoyed it. And even back in the day, he used to hang out and play guitar and stuff outside. So, he was definitely a marketer and someone that had designs of having a really, really great business and a great food truck. So when we toyed with the idea of, hey, should we bring someone in permanently? Because 2 things. One, a lot of the food trucks are not responsive and they're not dependable. So you get someone, you got them booked on a Friday night, and sometimes they broke down, and sometimes they just got a higher paying gig somewhere, and they said, well, screw it, I'm going to drop out on this.
Yeah. And
also you had the fact that when people came, they were like, man, I'm really digging, I want that Jeffrey Eats burger, or I want those wings that I had last time. Oh, it's an Italian meatball hoagie place. So people didn't know what the consistency was going to be. So I think the aspect of knowing that you can get the same food every time, they're going to be here every time, we have a permanent partnership, allowed us with something that we could do to grow. And I don't know if there's any other breweries that did that at the same time. I know Due South did something after we did for a period that didn't last too long. I don't know who else is doing it, but it's been a good thing for us because we are different businesses. We don't, our cash flow is independent. we are not entwined in that way at all, but we can count on each other to show up. And he knows that there's going to be a dedicated customer base that's going to be here for Barrel of Monks. We know that there's going to be a food option that they can count on to have. And it's been almost 3 years now, maybe 4. I can't even remember how long it's been, but it's actually been longer than half the time we've been open, because we're celebrating our 8th anniversary.
I was just about to say that, because you're coming up, as we are recording, you're about a week away from your 8th anniversary. Did you expect to last this long?
I had hoped so, but
right.
During COVID, I had my concerns, to be honest with you. That was such a tough time. They literally closed us down for a while, and we were not allowed to sell beer at all, at least through the tasting room. And distribution beer was almost non-existent. So that was a really tough time. So, yeah, have there been times that I had my concerns? Sure. But we're very happy to see the response and see we've got supporters out there. And so, yeah, very happy to be here 8 years in.
Never any doubt in my mind.
And, obviously to, I guess, solidify that rather interesting anchoring into the community, your episode of Diners, Drive, you know what I'm trying to say.
Triple D.
Yeah, Triple D. That was just on. That was just on last week, I think.
Yeah.
That's right.
Between you and Jeffrey Eats. What was that experience like?
It wasn't a lot on our side because it was not featuring Barrel of Monks, right? This is a restaurant show, so they are featuring the food. So we were mentioned on the show. Obviously, there's B-roll of our brewery and things of that nature, but it was all Jeff. I mean, he was the one that was petitioning forever to get on the show. It's his food that brought Guy Fieri here, and we're certainly going to reap some benefits from it. But for us, we had to do some things like clearing things out, and because they do recording on off hours and things like that. So we had to deal with some logistical issues, but really very little contact for us. It was a different. I can imagine it's a very different kind of thing than what they're used to doing, because they're usually going into restaurants and the one person owns the business and they're doing everything there, whereas we were kind of working together to try to make sure that we could feature them in the best way possible, and that his business is going to get a bump, which means our business is going to get a bump.
So what's coming up next? Obviously, you've got the anniversary party to go through, but what kind of styles, what kind of growth, what kind of things are you looking to hopefully feature in the next year or two?
Continued growth and making lots of good beer.
It's a simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the IPA, but that beer. So we made a couple IPAs over the last year or so, and they've all been building to something that could be consistent and a core beer for us. So, as the people listening to this, our core beer, our Waypoint IPA, is less than 3 months old as far as being in our portfolio and available on a regular basis. So that's a big part of what we're doing. We have a partnership with Flanagan's. We're in every single one of their locations, and they go through a good amount of beer, and they get a lot of non-craft beer drinkers to drink our beer, which is really, really good marketing for us.
Yeah.
And we're now opening that beer up to a lot of other places. We have some bottles out there in the market. We have some craft beer centric places that are going through a lot of it. So we went from, in the last 6 months to now, 2 core beers, Wizard and Havana, to now 3. And that's been a big challenge for us as far as production and scheduling and making sure we have tank space. So we're kind of, we're wading through those waters right now. And we've got a brewing schedule for the rest of the year that has some nice barrel-aged beers on it. Our Grand Cru's coming up. Obviously, Father Christmas is always a big thing for us at the end of the year.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Obviously.
So we've got, we try to put out, on average, a new beer a month in package. And we've got some canning releases coming up. We've got some bottle releases coming up. We've got the Trip Sitter, which is a barley wine that we put in a bourbon barrel that I think is just dynamite. So we've got some fun beers on the horizon. But right now, I mean, it's boring, but we're focused on production. We're focused on making sure those guys have what they need, and that we can we can make all the beer that people want to buy. Because if it's the other way around, if you can't make the beer and people want to buy it, you're in a hole.
And most importantly, make it well. Keep quality super high.
That's why he's my North Star.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. I want to try some beers, maybe.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
What was great is at the end of our recording, once that was finished, Kevin on the Barrel of Monks YouTube page and all the social media pages actually does what he calls Old Favorite Friday, which is where he and sometimes some people, sometimes just him, talks about an old beer that's just been around for a very, very long time that people are just very much happy and excited to have. And what's interesting is if you look on the episode that was released on August 4th, that's actually Bill and Kevin right there talking about a beer from Unibrew in Quebec. Obviously, it's not a Belgian, but if there's anybody who's making some killer Belgian beers, not in Belgium, not here in the state of Florida, they are definitely one of it. If you go back a couple of months, you will actually be able to see the episode that Kevin and I recorded, and the beer that I chose, very happily enough, was Kirin Ichiban, because I have some good memories of going to the Ichiban brewery near Yokohama. Anyways, definitely recommend that you do that, because it is a blast. And I also recommend that you stick around for the next episode of the Florida Beer Podcast next week, because we're going to be talking to another great Florida brewery, one that's been around for a very long time, longer than even I've been writing the blog. So I am not going to let you know who that is. I am going to, however, tell you to follow us on our socials. We are at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram, X, and Threads. We are at FL Beer Blog on Facebook, and obviously on the internet at floridabeerblog.com and floridabeerpodcast.com. We are also a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com, where you can get all the newest information about all the greatest shows that are on that network, our sister programs, which is pretty awesome. If you need to reach out to us for anything, please do so at floridabeerblog@gmail.com, and make sure to like and subscribe to our show on the podcasting app of your choice, and leave us a big 5-star review. It really does help us get the word out and spread the love of Florida's craft beer scene. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer for the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. This is David Butler, your host and author, ready to be back next week with another great episode of the Florida Beer Podcast. We will see you then. In the meantime, drink Florida craft.